Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the AXR Marketing Director Incubator. My name is Mike Dixon. I lead the sales and marketing practice for AXR Recruitment and Search. This is the program to help you make a better career conversation and understand your career journey. Today's guest is Gerard Smith, the new global CMO of Freedom Foods. Now, I've known Gerard for a number of years, and whilst his career has seen him at the helm of a number of leading FMCG organizations such as PepsiCo, Primo, and Lion. Most recently, prior to Primo, he was GM of marketing for TAFE New South Wales. So welcome, Gerard. How are you this morning?
Hey, Mike. How you doing? Nice to see you this morning.
Yeah, I'm very well. I'm loving your background, by the way. That's super cool.
For those that don't know Freedom, the Milk Lab is one of our flagships. So the milk that you choose matters. So when you go to a cafe, ask request by Milk Lab by name. Thanks, folks.
Nice plug. And talking of Freedom now, now Freedom Foods is a business in evolution, now I kind of I've heard on the grapevine that you're about to change the name. Now I know it's been not formally announced yet, but are you able to give us a bit of a scoop this morning?
Yeah, well, I suppose I can, and I suppose everyone has to keep this quiet, but it needs to be ratified by the shareholders. But yeah, we'll be changing the name from to Noumi, so Noumi, Noumi, and that's really gives a new direction for the business, focusing on nutrition, nourishment, particularly focusing on things like proteins, milks, plant milks, etc. So yeah, so that'll be announced following shareholder sign off, so in later this month. So yeah, very, very excited.
Fantastic. Well, people in the live call, worth getting up this morning. You've got a bit of news ahead of a lot of other people, so very exciting. Glad to hear it. Hope it goes well. Hope it lands well. Can't wait to see how that looks as well. Now, I mentioned before, Gerard, you've obviously run the marketing function for a number of different organizations, and we'll get into that's going to give you a great kind of platform for today's conversation. But as a bit of an icebreaker, I'd love to know, I've always wanted to ask this of my guests, if you could sit on the board of any organization in the world, which one would you pick?
It's a pretty big question, and I don't know. Look, I actually have a very good soft spot for the Swans, actually, and I've always loved sport, but I always have watched from afar how the Swans have gone about sort of establishing from the early days of a team that was really kind of struggling in the market to what I think is an absolutely fantastic organisation, and I think so difficult in sports organisations to take, particularly young men, and now they're obviously moving more into women as well, but young men who've highly professional, focused just on sport, and how to give them a kind of sense of perspective in life beyond sport, and make them kind of well-grown adults. So I don't know, I really loved, and I've seen it's been consistent year after year that they've really created a great culture, and I think it'd be really, really great to be part of that. And I think some really good lessons probably coming out of an area like the Swans that I think could also be imparted across businesses as well. So yeah, that would be it would be great to be a fly on the wall, I think, certainly over the last 10 years. But yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think sports organizations are super interesting. I've done some work in recruiting for sports companies and organizations, whether it's clubs themselves or the kind of bodies that run sport. And I think at one level it is, there's a lot of profile that comes with it, which comes with pressure. Actually, you make a mistake in your own business, and a few people hear about it. You make a mistake with a sporting club, and my goodness, there's a lot of people really interested in what you've done. So it's but the Swans has been a super interesting journey for sure. No, interesting. Right, I'll. In the future is once you've done your amazing job with Noumi, if I'm in the market for looking for the leader of the Swans or another big sporting organization, Gerard, you'll be in the shortlist. So, thanks, let's jump back to early career as a starter. Was marketing always a pathway for you? How did you get in?
Yeah, I mean, look, I grew up in the country. I grew up in a farm, and I had two things I just didn't want to be when I finished school. I didn't want to be a farmer, and I didn't want to be a teacher. They were both my parents' jobs. So I came down to Sydney to go to uni, and I decided just to do business because I thought, well, that's kind of general enough. didn't really know much about it. And well, we had to choose I remember we had to actually choose at UTS, had to actually choose a major at the time. I remember we were signing up to enroll. I'm thinking, I don't even know what the difference between any of these things was, accounting and finance. And I thought marketing sounded interesting. I read a few brochures on the table. So I signed up for marketing, and then I just, did it. And then I actually really enjoyed it. It sort of appeals to my sort of intellectual curiosity, and I like the sort of diversity. I like the psychology side. I like the sort of the communication side. And so, yeah, I just kind of from there, kind of then started in marketing, and found today I really am passionate about it, and I really, really love it, and I love the diversity. It's constantly changing. I can't think of many other sort of functions or careers or areas where every year things constantly change in marketing, and the whole digital revolution probably has impacted marketing more than any other function. So, yeah, I look. I think it's always a great career choice for anyone if you like lots of change, and you can. I think if you can deal with a bit of ambiguity, because you're always dealing with the big decisions where you never know all the answers. You have to make a lot of good assumptions and trust a fair bit of your judgment and instinct. So, yeah. Anyway, so it was a happy accident, and kind of glad I made that choice on that day, turning up to UTS enrollment.
Funny how sometimes those early decisions on a whim almost form our lives. Imagine if you'd just seen a better brochure on something else.
Yeah.
So,
I did. There was a couple of people in the line next to me, and there were I think there were a couple of girls, and I said, "What are you doing?" They're going, "Well, we're going to do marketing." So I don't know whether that had any sort of
how the mind of an 18-year-old boy works, eh? Oh, excellent. And as your career progressed, at what stage did you think, or was there a point you thought, actually, I'm going to stick at this? I could see myself as a marketing director.
Yeah, look, I never did, and I remember thinking as I was sort of becoming a brand manager that if I could kind of make it to marketing manager, that'd probably be good enough for me. Like that would be that would be a great part of my career, and I didn't ever really see that or have aspirations to be marketing director. I did make one strategic move in my career, and it's more strategic in hindsight. But I remember I'd been at Uncle Toby's for 4 years, and I was kind of senior brand manager. I think I was brand manager, and senior brand manager, and sort of emerging marketing manager. And it's a great brand. We had a great culture. It was a good team. But I realized I was going to struggle to get kind of to marketing manager, because the bits that I wasn't so good at was the really detailed sort of project management, like keeping the trains running on time. Just wasn't my kind of core strength. I like the more strategic side, the challenging, the kind of brand positioning. And so what I decided, I thought, well, you know what, if I'm going to be, my competitive advantage is not going to be the best kind of person that can lead projects and the most disciplined, organized person. And those who have worked with me can contest that today. So I actually stepped out and I went to a global consultancy called Added Value, which is a marketing consultancy, big branding sort of place. It's now owned, part of the big WPP empire or Kantar empire. But I did that deliberately because I thought, you know what, I actually maybe, and I wasn't going to do it for all my career, but I thought that's a really good way for me to really hone my skills in the more sort of strategic side of marketing, and look at a lot of different kind of clients and companies rather than just FMCG. And I didn't know whether I was going to be good at it, and I certainly thought the first 6 months, oh wow, there are some really, really super smart people here. I'm not one of them. But my brain was spinning, and and in fact, I worked with people like Adam Ferrier at the time, and then there was Jenny Vaughan and Anita Batho. So some really, really highly talented people that were there at the time. And I remember after a couple of years, you just really get in the swing of really having your brain kind of challenged all the time, constantly on new challenges and how do I solve problems. And what I worked out from there is what I'm actually pretty good at is kind of solving problems and figuring things out and challenging and looking at different perspectives. And I kind of did that. And then once I sort of got there, then I went, you know what? I'm going to go back to client side, and I'm going to pick a company I want to work for on the client side. And I think now I've got a competitive advantage to my career that the other kind of marketing managers don't have. And look, I was I was incredibly lucky. I kind of had an offer, I think, from Colgate, from Diageo, and from PepsiCo. And I just kind of got attracted to PepsiCo only because I thought it was interesting. And my boss is an American guy, and ex-P&G guy, great leader. And it was really just by accident. I came in there, and I think 9 months later, he was asked to go back to the US, and then I was asked to step up into the marketing director role. Like I had absolutely no aspiration. I didn't know that I'll be made marketing director. You know, it was one of those ones where it just happened. You know, and I don't. These things aren't just all accidents, but it was a fair bit of right time, right place. But the decision to move into the consultancy, in hindsight, much more strategic. But I think it is. But in hindsight, but I do think it's a big lesson for lots of folks, which is find things that you can learn, new things that you can learn, that's going to challenge you, that's going to really give you a competitive advantage on your, not just on your CV, but in your confidence and your capability, because that's what will differentiate you in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, actually, and one of the whole purposes of this program is to help people think more strategically about their career, and the role in front of you is not always the most obvious one, or neither is the company the most obvious one, and getting an experience that's going to enable you to be competitive is actually a really good way to think about the decisions you're making. How do I create a unique proposition about me? So I think that's really interesting that was something you did there. You mentioned something earlier too around you know, an Uncle Toby's great team and so forth, and current team accepted, because that'd be unfair. But you know, is there a time you look back on and you think, wow, we had it really humming in that business. That was the kind of the best point in which the team was really together, aligned, and a great place to be. Is there a point when you look back and you think, wow, super proud of what we did there?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a few examples, and I know that if any of my friends at TAFE kind of will have this mantra drilled into them, but I have a philosophy of three things that marketing teams need to do, right? The teams need to do great work. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what you're paid to do. You've got to do great work, whether it's great communications, great strategy, just deliver great work, right? The second thing, and the most important part is marketing teams need to build bridges. And I often see marketing teams either split functionally because they divide themselves into brands and then they kind of fight internally, or they set themselves up as a team that's kind of, oh, well, we're the marketing team, we're kind of different, and we almost compete against other functions for a voice, because marketing teams often, you know, don't necessarily have as much a seat at the table at the commercial discussion, so they sort of fight with other teams. And then thirdly, marketing kind of needs to have fun, right? You know, at the end of the day, we're in the business of kind of, you know, consumers and customers, and we should have fun. So great work, build bridges both with your own team and outside the organisation, and then have fun. And I think where I sort of learnt that from was when I first went across to PepsiCo and I took over the marketing director role, because there'd been quite a few changes, and I think that they'd come out of a structure. Two previous marketing directors, there was a real kind of sales kind of mentality in the company. The marketing team really didn't know its kind of place in the organisation. It kind of, you know, internally there was a kind of a fair bit of, you know, friction amongst the team internally, and then there's this real kind of like almost an anti-sales mentality of the team, and therefore the overall sort of all health and engagement of the team was very low. And people were a little bit disgruntled, and you know, sort of said, "Wow, we always, our marketing budgets always get cut." So, and I was kind of new to the role, and I sort of had a couple of good folks in the team. We brought Seb Brandt came in, Amanda Howard, a few really good leaders, and we just said to them, right, I think we just got to sort this out as a team together. I think there was Emma was there, and Fiona Miles. So, I mean, really some great people, and we said, let's just create the sort of culture we want, and let's stop trying to fight everything around. Let's just focus on what we're here to do, which is let's just do some great work. Let's really get the love behind some of these brands. You know, we just had Jenny Dilla had just recently been there. She'd gone overseas. She just launched Red Rock Deli, so we had this amazing little kind of nugget of a brand that she had created that was amazing. Going, right, let's just make Red Rock Deli amazing, right? Let's just do a fantastic job. Let's do a great job on Smith. Let's do innovation. And so we just together, just collectively built this fantastic business where we supported, and then overall collectively at that time, PepsiCo, we went from, I think, less than a 50 share business to, I think, a 65 share. And it was a really team effort across marketing, sales, ops, and it really all came together. And the marketing team really felt like the absolute heart of making the change and impact and driving the growth of the business. And we did it. I mean, it was great. And then what we saw was the org health the score ended up, I think it was in the 90s by the time I left. Like, it was a really great team. And we had the way we did things like budgets. Like, we got the budget at the start of the year. I said, all right, guys, let's take out the contingency. So forget the cut, right? The cut's going to go anyway. Take that out. Right. Now, as a team, how do we collectively, what are the priorities? So we, as a leadership team, we focused on what we would do with the overall budget and the investment priorities. And then we allocated it out so that there was none of my direct reports felt like they had to kind of have ownership and control of certain amounts of money, because it was a collective team decision to work out based on the priority. So, and I sort of followed that same sort of philosophy. I kind of try to take in nearly all the roles that I've gone to, and not always as successful as I would like, but certainly more often than not, it's I found it to be really kind of great philosophy and way to bring a team together.
Yeah, great model. You mentioned TAFE earlier, and I talked about that being your most recent role prior to the current one at Freedom Foods, Gerard. Having had a career in FMCG, that's a really interesting move. Talk a bit about how that happened and why you took it, and what you've got out of it.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting. Because the restructure came up at Lion around the time just before sort of the first COVID hit. So I think that must have been around February or March, and then over a year ago. And so then COVID hit, and I suddenly went, oh right, well, this COVID might be a big deal. What do I want to do? And I sort of, I'd kind of gone through Lion. I sort of, like, okay, I've done lots of these big sort of kind of global businesses and in marketing. I went, you know what, I wouldn't mind maybe doing something different. So I actually thought, I always thought, look, one of the things in consumer goods that you don't get as much experience directly on is this whole end-to-end customer journey and the data and the management and the whole kind of analytics coming through from, finding a customer outside the, in the world, and then bringing them down through and then converting them into a sale. In FMCG, you pass that over to retailers, etc. So I was going to do some more studying, and then this opportunity came up at TAFE. And I thought, you know what, this actually sounds interesting. It's a completely different industry. It's in service. It's working for the government. Actually quite passionate about what TAFE does, because one of my parents used to work at TAFE. And it was going to really challenge me in terms of a new level of marketing skills. So, and what I found was incredible. So first of all, what I understood now is what people in service marketing know a lot more about the whole kind of customer journey, CX, website, search optimization, all those kind of things that you kind of talk a little bit about in consumer goods. People in service marketing know that deeply. They know about EDM optimization. They know about the integration of, of kind of complex web systems and how you measure. A lot of it's a bit smoke and mirrors, and people kind of claim a lot of stuff because actually still there's a lot of stuff that you can measure. But it was like, to me, getting into it was almost relearning a whole lot of marketing skills and areas that I didn't know. And it was absolutely fantastic, because I sort of came in, and again, my real role there was to really create a strong kind of team and culture within TAFE marketing. But at the same time, I was able to really learn a whole lot. It was almost a year and I think it was 15 months of just really, really kind of deep learning. And I said to the team, I'm here to learn digital and all these kind of things, and website analytics and everything else. And look, very proud. I think we submitted a whole lot of Effies. I hope we do well, but that's of course not the outcome. But yeah, it's interesting. And look, a couple of things I do think for consumer goods marketers, what I would think about though is the world is moving more services. As consumption society, we're now, I think 70% of our income gets spent on services. So as a career in marketing, there's obviously going to be a lot more growth in services areas, whether that's education, tourism, hospitality, delivery foods, all that kind of stuff, right? So services is a really big part. And a key part of marketing's role in services is you own the end-to-end customer. Whereas in consumer goods, you might have the consumer, of which you then pass the customer, then goes obviously to a retailer or their online platform. And then you kind of hand them over at that stage. And you obviously got to keep nurturing, but you don't own the customer, the retailer will. But in services, you own the customer through. So you see them all the way through from when they're considering right through to final purchase. And then in a business like TAFE, re-enrollment is an absolutely critical part of the business model. So you see how many people come in, you then track, you measure, you see what students have done, how do you upgrade them to a different course? How do you think about giving them a short course? Like there's a whole kind of program which you own that end-to-end experience. And that's very, very analytical and requires a lot of technology and a real understanding of your technology roadmap to how do you optimize that customer journey. So there's some areas that I think if anyone is in consumer goods and you're interested or thinking about it, I would definitely encourage you, because that's where I think a lot of the future of marketing is going to go. And I was looking at some amazing people at TAFE, some young folks coming through that have such a deep understanding about the technical, the intersection between the technology and the marketing that you don't really get in consumer goods. What I would say though is, where I felt coming in from a consumer goods, where you have a more broad marketing understanding of consumer goods. So you think more strategically, you think more positioning, you get into the other P's, you think more about product, more about pricing, more about distribution. Some of those absolute kind of core, almost more strategic marketing skills that you really learn out of consumer goods, and you learn from quite a young age in consumer goods, are incredibly invaluable then when you come across to a services business. So what I found, and I had a great, kind of 2IC there, Matt McGuinness at TAFE, who's probably a great experience because he's got a bit of both, but he and I both looked at things in the same way, more from a consumer goods, more from an Ehrenberg Bass type kind of point of view. And how do you apply those kind of core, rules of marketing that are unchangeable in a service business? And for example, things like, we were spending so much money on search because we thought, we have to kind of buy all the search terms. When actually what we realized is if you actually get more of the equity in the brand of TAFE more broadly and the engagement of the brand more broadly, you actually get all that search for free. So we were able to significantly grow search through actually reducing search by spending more money in big consideration marketing. So all I'm saying is there are some examples of where you apply, I think, some very good foundations and learnings you get out of consumer goods, but then you really learn an extra sort of string to your bow in service marketing. So I found that valuable. But look, I always kind of considered my calling. I love kind of food marketing. I love the kind of global side of things. So I wasn't really, when I had the opportunity to kind of to move on, I sort of thought, look, I've got great learning. I wasn't really, wasn't then kind of keen to stay at TAFE for certainly a long-term career.
Yeah. Really interesting that you took a learning perspective into that role from your point of view, because a lot of people look at your career, Gerard, and think he's worked in some great organizations. He must know everything there is to know. But I love the lens that you've looked at that through in terms of, what can you give them, but what can you take as well in terms of a learning, and that's really interesting because if I just think back as a recruiter and somebody who talks to people all the time about careers and one of the things I talk a lot about is make sure you don't get too narrow. And an example being, I've just filled a chief consumer officer role, CMO role, in an FMCG company, and the person who got the role actually had spent the last 4 years out of FMCG working in a services environment. And had developed a whole bunch of skills not dissimilar to what you're talking about, and that perspective actually enabled them to be more competitive and ultimately the candidate chosen for the role. So stepping out of FMCG isn't necessarily a step away from it. It can accelerate you in other spaces and enable you to come back, and even better individual if you do it for the right reasons. So I'd encourage it. And in fact, so much so, we at AXR here, we're well known for building over the last couple of years our brand in the FMCG and consumer goods space. But we really see the opportunity as well to have a footprint in services and a B2B market. And we've just hired a guy called Chris Hamill, who's joined our team to do that and develop that market for us, because we want to be able to help people map their careers in both directions, as opposed to just being narrowly focused on FMCG. So we're trying to take our own medicine and develop more breadth to the offering that we've got here. But I really like your take on that.
Well, and also I think though, as you think about getting more senior, what becomes obviously, it's a cliche, but your leadership trumps your technical skills. But I think it's being put yourself in areas where you're really challenging your technical skills is a way to, I think, really develop your leadership. Because if you just continue to lead by having the same kind of pattern and the same kind of playbook that you've done every year, and I remember a really great CEO, Glenn Stevens of Pepsi in Australia years ago, said, look, is your career made up of 10 different roles where you've just done the same things 10 times over? Or have you got 10 different roles where you've absolutely, each role you've learned something really significant and you've thrown yourself in to challenge yourself? He said, that's about learning. And then you learn more about, and the only way to learn more about yourself and how you lead is throwing yourself in an environment that's quite different to what you're used to and comfortable with being.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can go in different directions. Now, you've worked in global and local roles as well. Is that something you'd encourage people to kind of embrace? I know we're at a time where moving into global roles isn't that easy, but it will become so again in the next year. Something that you think is important, Gerard, for someone to kind of do in their career going forward?
Look, I was very fortunate. I mean, again, look, I grew up in the country. Moving to Sydney was a big move for me, and so Australians love to travel, and I think if you can, and I would encourage everyone to add overseas working experience in their career if they can, and even if you can't do it in a company, if you have the benefit to do it. I mean, there's visas are available for Australians to go to the US. They still are, but once COVID lifted, I mean, look, I worked in Pepsi. I did my MBA locally here. I probably was going to travel early with Pepsi, but I wanted to get that completed. And then I moved to New Zealand. And it was interesting, even though New Zealand's only just across the ditch, it's actually amazingly different country. And when you move countries, even though culture it's the same, sometimes that can actually be more challenging because you keep going, oh, it's just, the worst possible thing you could say, it's another state of Australia, which it certainly isn't, but it is a completely different culture. And it's an eye-opener. You learn lots of different parts about people. And then obviously I moved to the US, and I think we're there 4 years. We're a sort of young sort of family or teenage family. And I worked on a global role. So I traveled extensively out of the US to all parts of the world. And it was the most exciting, most inspiring, most learning. It's just an incredible time in your career. And in our team, in our global office, we had cultures from all around the world. So we had Latin Americans, Eastern Europeans, West Europeans, Asians, Middle East in our team. And you learn so much about people and cultures, and you realize actually human beings generally much more similar than different. And that culture is just an interesting part of our bringing up. It's not who we are, but and so I just think that side, and now suddenly at Freedom, or Numi as we will be called, I'm looking after focusing heavily on Southeast Asia and China, and it's just fantastic. And I'm suddenly inspired again about, when you start looking at different parts of the world, the different growth models, the different cultures, how they've grown up, how you kind of get in and market to them. It's absolutely fascinating. And if everyone, and look, it's not for everyone, but if you do get the opportunity, I'd say it's something to push for and encourage you to everyone to try and think about it.
Yeah, well, my view is, I think once we get into the next year or so, there's a real appetite of one. I think people want to come to Australia, and we've seen very little talent coming into the country, obviously, for the last year and a half, that's going to happen. And I think the flow should go the other way too. So I'd strongly encourage it for anybody who's thinking of it to keep your eyes open in the next year.
And I'd say probably post-COVID, whatever that looks like, it's a bit of a band-aid. I think what we'll see with talent is, because there's been less movement around, I think what'll happen is once things start opening up, I think there'll be a real kind of surge for there'll be a bunch of moves, and so there'll be a number of talent opportunities kind of opening up. So yeah, no, I mean, look, it's we left when our kids were. A lot of people leave when their kids are young. That's much easier to do in some ways, because you kind of, you don't have to have the huge angst of teenagers swapping schools with teenagers. I don't know if you do that, Mark, but oh my God, that's a nightmare. Yeah. But yeah, it's a little easier, I think, when they're young, but then you've got the whole hassle about young kids. But yeah, so anyway, but I think it's certainly, if you're thinking about it, I would really put that on your kind of vision board and go, yeah, I want to make it happen.
Yeah, well,
don't delay.
It's certainly going to be all trends point to a very busy recruitment marketplace next year. So
good for you, Mike.
We're expanding our team. Send any good recruiters our way. I want to talk now, Gerard, about the role you do and the view from sitting on exec teams and the interaction between exec teams and boards and relationships and so forth. Really interesting, because you've worked in a variety of organizations, and I think that experience will be invaluable to people on the call. Let's start first of all, from your point of view, what role should marketing play in an executive team?
Yeah, so look, I suppose the majority of a business is really there to drive. It's almost the day-to-day. In fact, the business, generally speaking, and this is more consumer goods, is more generally speaking fixated on the day-to-day operation and running. So what are my daily sales? What are my weekly sales? What's my weekly ops plan? What's my weekly safety? All the kind of core metrics of the balance kind of scorecard kind of have an operating rhythm of day-to-day. And then that then gets rolled up to financial monthly performance, to monthly outlooks and quarterly monthly outlooks. So the business is all about just really making sure running the business well and having a clear kind of strategic plan where things are going. But most of the people in the company are working on the kind of the here and the now, with a sense of where they're going. Marketing and to a large degree innovation and R&D are really the custodians of making things happen for the time period that's kind of a year, 2 years, 3 years in advance. And how are you helping the business make big decisions about direction, about where we might be going from a business? What do we need to do from a capital investment? Where are categories going? What are consumers doing? And because mostly marketing leading indicators are things that are going to happen in the future, it's all assumption based. So marketing is to be able to give confidence to the business about clarity about what we're seeing about where things are going, and therefore what are actually the plans that are in place and the portfolio of different kind of initiatives that we've got in the plan to kind of address what we're seeing coming in the future, and then making that happen. So that's why marketing is absolutely critical for growth, because it's focusing on a point of view on the future and saying, what are we going to be doing differently or better than the competition to be able to meet and answer that growth.
Okay. And how does that manifest itself in terms of the relationship between the marketing director or the CMO and the CEO?
So the CEO, first of all, the relationship has to be fantastic. And the CEO is heavily reliant and dependent on the marketing director or chief marketing officer, as equally they are for each of their other kind of key leads. But really, it's all about trust that the marketing team are focusing on the growth that's going to be coming down, that's going to be then hitting the P&L in the coming months and years. And that the CEO needs to have absolute trust that the marketing team have kind of got that's their ownership and accountability, and to deliver that growth. I've always found, I've always had really great relationships with with CEOs, and most of the companies I've worked in, marketing and consumer goods is at the heart. So there's not a debate and question about the importance of marketing. It's just about, and it's really about understanding. I always found personally, different CEOs have different perspectives. So some CEOs have a more of a marketing bent, in which case they want to get deeper into the marketing side. Others don't really understand it, but want to learn more. Others want to really focus on, might be just much more focused on, what are the really big things that matter? Like, what are the big innovations? What are the big sort of, capital investments that we need to make? The CEO needs to therefore be able to talk to the board or to the regions or sectors, depends if it's a multinational. And the CEOs are expected to be very au fait at marketing. So they are really, and a lot of them, if they haven't necessarily come through recently out of marketing, are very heavily dependent on the marketing person to be able to make them look smart or educated in front of their bosses and peers. I've always really kind of tried to understand what makes the CEO tick, what they really want to focus on, and just adjust my style to meet and adjust so I can be a good partner of them. Yeah. And you kind of got to really be quite adaptable, because every CEO is, has very different experience and comes from a different background.
Yeah. One of the areas I've touched on from a couple of perspectives in the past, Gerard, is this kind of move from functional lead to running a business. And it feels to me that on one level, a lot of marketers develop, great skills around understanding all of the business. They see the business end to end. They're strategically smart. They're good analysts. That step into running a business as a GM or an MD or a country manager feels like a good move to make. Now, it doesn't always happen as frequently as it could, but what's your view on someone from a senior marketing role moving up to an MD's role?
Yeah, look, and I had that experience. I went to New Zealand to run the PepsiCo snacks business over in New Zealand, the Bluebird business, and I remember at the time my boss at the time who I was very keen to do this and have a new experience. So Richard Glover was my boss at the time, and I said to him, Richard, I'm kind of anxious. I don't really understand all the kind of I'm not as familiar with all the balance sheet and all the detailed kind of machinations of it. And he said, Gerard, let me give you some advice. First of all, the technical side of what you do in that role, you're going to learn that and understand it. That's no problems. The detailed parts of ops, he goes, and plus you're going to have great people that work for you. It's not your job to get into the real detail of that. He said, the bit that you're going to learn and you have to learn is that over there as country GM, you now won't have any peers. So you are the most senior person in the room. So he said, you will be the funniest, you'll be the smartest, you'll be the wisest, you'll be the most strategic until you leave the room. In which case, you are going to be the person that they go, bloody hell, Gerard, he's got no clear idea where the business is going. So he said, what you'll learn is about to step up and have leadership, and how you motivate, influence, direct across most of the areas of the business that you don't have a technical understanding in. And that's what leadership is. And if you see most of the great CEOs, like Ramon now, who's the CEO of Pepsi at the moment, right? He was a marketing guy, then came through sales, but then he ended up being kind of country managed. But then they take on really large divisional, like he ran the whole of Europe. So, and they might do. So generally speaking, the CEOs I've always found have generally come out of a consumer, marketing sales background, not always. But really then it's about you're talking about large, complex organizations with really, really detailed parts of decision making, and it's then becomes about the leadership of leading complexity across multiple areas. And that's what really a great CEO is able to do, is to get really great clarity in a world where the organization is incredibly complex and huge amounts of diverse areas that are all kind of conflicting for either attention or resources.
In your pathway forward, Gerard, because you've done those GM roles, you've led functions at a kind of large level as well. It's for you personally, is a pathway back to GM CEO at some point, or is it about just taking on? You've got a big challenge, an exciting journey in front of you with Freedom Stroke New Me, but for you, is it more and more interesting CMO roles, or do you see yourself one day jumping up to the CEO role?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure. What really motivates me is the ability to make a difference and to drive change and to drive growth. I absolutely, I absolutely love my role, the GM role in New Zealand. But I would say it is a very much more it's a very different role. So I jumped from that role, then I went to the big global role, running all the global snack brands for PepsiCo, which was almost chalk and cheese. And I kind of loved both roles. They both had significant levels of leadership, but incredibly different levels of leadership. The global role, it was much more about sort of influencing and understanding and trying to drive direction and clarity across the world, where we had this discombobulated bunch of countries all wanting to do their own thing, like these rogue countries like Australia and New Zealand, saying, well, we're different down here. I'm going, well, no, you're not. But
don't tell us that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know. I'm not sure, actually. If it's the right CEO, I absolutely would love to do it. But there are certain, if it's a very, very transactional, not so much transactional, but if it's a very operational role, I'm probably not as interested. I like the ability where you can really get in. At the moment with Numi, we're thinking about, how do we add value with dairy up through, we've got a great dairy business up through Southeast Asia and China, but how do we move into contest those segments where there's higher margins, higher value? And they're the sort of key questions. So that's the full kind of understanding the market, the consumer, the customer, the innovation required, the partnerships. They're the big kind of questions I like to solve. And look, I find a lot of times I hear this kind of comment about marketing people don't become CEOs. And I think maybe marketing people don't become country general managers as much, because a lot of times for the big companies, a country general manager is really the most senior salesperson. Because a lot of the multinationals, you are running generally a lot of times, not even operations is locally. Operations will report up into global. Marketing will be connected up through the regions or the global teams. And then really what you have on the ground is the point that's the most close to the customer, which is the execution. And so therefore it makes sense that the most senior country role is actually a salesperson, because their majority of their day is dealing with the sales team.
Yeah.
And I suppose the only other thing I would say to that is, I think marketing deal and yes, have really good breadth of understanding of the business, but I'm not sure marketers learn and have as much experience with really understanding the breadth of the people. And what I mean by that is, if you come out of operations or sales, you generally have large teams. You've grown up from working in the field. You then may have been a field manager, then you may be a state manager where you have large teams. And if I compare to, when I was at Lions, so Mark Powell was my counterpart in sales, I had a large marketing team, quite large for an Australian business, but his sales team was massive. Like he had all the, field sales, merchandisers, people that went and called on premise, off premise. So his complexity, his people leadership needed just to be, insanely good. Marketing, yes, also, but much smaller though. Really, you're dealing with 5 times fewer people. So a lot of times that's when for someone then going up to be so I would say to a marketing person is, if you want to be CEO, where are you going to add a level of depth of leadership, of people leadership, and complexity, so that when you become CEO, you've really you're a great kind of breadth of people leader.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. That's thinking strategically about your career, and a lot of that is the conversations you have with the company you're working with too. And sometimes if you're taking a new role, you might be taking a senior marketing role, but it's a conversation on the way into that business is, hey, I have, I want to add value in different ways. I want to add to my skill set, and if there's an opportunity to work in other functions and lead other functions, as a leader. And some companies are pretty open to that. There's some businesses I've worked with who are quite happy taking the risk of moving somebody from the functional, marketing lead to the sales lead, or even move them into HR. Those things do happen. So there are more frequent, I think, lateral moves cross-functionally than you think, and I think people should be open to them, and as well as moving into organizations like TAFE and getting into services. Those points are all really valid in terms of developing your breadth.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong in wanting to have a great career in marketing. One of my great peers at PepsiCo, he was insights and strategy, and Philip Chambers, genius thinker, and wonderful in PepsiCo. But I remember we went on this great leadership program with Indra at the time, the CEO, and we had to go around a sort of campfire, kind of weird, sort of surreal kind of, literally was around a campfire in somewhere in North America somewhere. And she's asking about it, and I remember Philip saying to her, Indra, I don't want to be CEO. I don't want to be marketing director. I love insight and strategy.
Yeah.
And is that okay? And she goes, Philip, of course, we don't want everyone to be we don't need everyone to be CEOs. We need great people and great people who are in the business. So he ended up moving on to Amex, but he wanted to stay. He wanted to be a deep expert in insight and strategy, but he wanted to kind of move out of consumer goods into more data analytics. And I think that's absolutely, I don't think there's this obsession about procession to wanting to become CEO. And I think maybe this is a difference in mindset in Australia versus some other, the bigger markets. You don't typically have this kind of sort of this functional that then goes up to what is country GM. And I think when most people talk about CEOs, they often just really, what I think they're talking about is country GM.
Yeah.
Which, in PepsiCo's term, my role, the VP of Global Snacks, is a bigger role, is a higher banded role than the country manager in Australia. So because of the level of breadth and complexity. So, if you look in America, and I watched a lot of the great graduates come up through there, there's a lot more people are moving into different jobs to get, and that your career is much more kind of managed across different experiences. But because there's just the breadth and scale of the roles.
Yeah, and I think a good point. I mean, not everyone's on the path to CEO. It's a very different role. There are many ways forward to keep your career going, but we are out of time. So on that really interesting conversation, we're gonna have to park. But we covered a lot, Gerard. That was superb. So thanks for giving us so much this morning, as well as the announcement right at the start. So Numi is the new name for Freedom Foods, about to be announced, depending on shareholder ratification. But that's really great, guys. For those on a live call, this will be out in podcast in a week's time. Today we've got a new podcast launching, a bonus session with the CEO of Future Brand, a branding agency, a guy called Richard Curtis. So great conversation with Rich, very different perspective from a marketer's point of view. So subscribe to Your Future in Sales and Marketing on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and you'll find that podcast landing today. In fact, I think it's just out. In a couple of weeks' time, we've got a sales director incubator live session with Chris Shaw, who's a commercial director of Diageo. So looking forward to what Chris has got to see. He's been in that role for a couple of years now, I think. Our next marketing director incubator, the next live session, is on November 4th with Victoria Baker, who's a group brand director at GWA. So Victoria, I've also known for many years. She's got an ostensibly FMCG career, but in GWA, it's a very different business proposition. So great to see how that's worked out for her. All sessions from over the last couple of years, guys, are available on the podcast. So once again, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, please like, subscribe, comment, whatever. It helps others find us, and it makes me feel good as well. So thanks for that. Gerard, once again, thank you. That was absolutely tremendous.
No, and it's a great thing that you're doing, Mike. I think it's really, really terrific. And as I said to everyone, if you want to get a great mentor, Mike is a terrific bloke and really, really wise and knowledgeable in the industry. So no, really great thing for you to be leading, Mike. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy your Thursday.